Well, hello there and welcome. This is Emily Midget from 6th Street Sundries, and today I have a watercolor project to share with you showing you how I watercolor white flowers. White flowers can be challenging because it's not just the absence of color. You have to kind of add the shape in there, and that can sometimes be tricky for people. So today I'm going to be using the Orchid Rose Bouquet, which is a stamp set that I actually illustrated for Simon Says Stamp, and I'm so excited that it was included in their February 2022 card kit for the month. That was really exciting for me. It features a really large bouquet on a 6x8 stamp set. It's got some orchids, some roses, some foliage, lots of different sentiments, and I'm going to be I heat embossed it using VersaFine Smoky Gray and some white satin pearl embossing powder. The combination of these two really gives a lovely kind of charcoal pearlescent embossed look. Which I think is just a little bit softer and prettier than a typical clear embossing over black ink. So I'm going to be watercoloring with my Schminky watercolors today. This is a set that I just bought a set of 48 already pre-poured, and then I added a few extra colors in because I like pink and they didn't have enough pink. Now with white watercoloring, it's my philosophy that if you add lots of color around the white image, you will kind of trick your brain into seeing that white image a little bit better. It's really easy to add too much color and too much shading to a white image. And so in order to kind of keep perspective on that white flower, I like to add a really vibrant background and vibrant colors around that white flower. And that helps me really see the whiteness of the watercolor paper. This is Arches cold press watercolor paper that I flipped over to the not quite as textured side, the smoother side of that watercolor paper, just so that I could really pick up the detail on that super detailed image. I am adding a really bright, vibrant, vivid teal background, and this is going to help me see that white watercolor flower even more clearly. You want to be very judicious with the amount of color that you add to a white flower, because a white flower, it's white, but there are shadows. It picks up reflections of color from other things around it. So you want to make sure, that that base layer of white is the main thing that you see. So here I'm just adding lots of vivid, that dark kind of deep teal color, lots of water, lots of pigment there, and I'm going to add a little bit, a second layer, adding a little bit of extra intensity to some of the areas in those little nooks and crannies there that got a little bit lost when I was adding my first layer. So just add some extra pigment down there, clean my brush, and use that clean brush to pull that color out and make it into that really pretty watercolory kind of nebulous look in the background. So now that we have the background completely finished, I'm going to start work on the white orchid. Now, I'm starting out by using just a very diluted lavender color. I find that lavender is really lovely for adding shadows. It just kind of adds the suggestion of a shadow without really adding a whole lot of color to it. So I'm just adding very diluted, again, very, very diluted. You want lots of water. Add some of those lilac shadows, those lavender shadows in the areas where the petals kind of overlap. Find the petals that are behind and add your shadows to those first. Again, that contrast and that perspective will help you keep from adding too much color to your white image. So I'm just adding some very diluted color to the areas that are shadowed, and then I'm pulling that color out with a clean, damp paintbrush. I clean my paintbrush off, dab it on my stamp chamois, and I pull that color out a little bit just so that it fades nicely and organically. I am using the lines that I included on the illustration as kind of a guide for where the shadows might go. And the color, the video is a little bit washed out here, and I apologize for that. It's a little bit difficult to see sometimes that because I'm adding so little color to it. But you do want to make sure that you are very judicious with the amount of color that you add initially, because you can always add color, but you cannot take it away very easily. So being being frugal with the amount of pigment that you add. As you add each layer, you can intensify that if you want, but if you add too much at the very beginning, it's hard to fix that. It's hard to really maintain that white flower. By using lots of water, though, I am able to pull that color out and maintain that white base layer that is the white cardstock, the white watercolor cardstock. So now I've done my first layer of my orchid. Now I'm just going to add some really bright, vibrant pink to the rose around on the other sides. Adding this really vibrant pink on the flowers on either side also helps to intensify the contrast of that white flower. It helps your mind see, oh, hey, that's a white flower because this flower next to it is super, super bright and this one is pale. So it helps to kind of do some reverse psychology on your mind and your eyes to trick you into thinking that this is a white flower. So for this, it's just basic watercoloring. I'm laying down a little bit of pigment. I clean my brush, dab it on my stamp chamois, and I pull that color out so that it is pulled into a nice organic smooth fade. I am keeping my tip of my paintbrush pointed away from me, and that helps me control where that tip of that paintbrush is going. It helps me keep a better eye on where exactly I'm putting the tip of my paintbrush. So now I'm going back and I'm intensifying a little bit the shadows on my white orchid. I did a little bit of it's kind of a steely gray lavender color. It's a little bit more intense and a little bit less diluted pigment wise, and I'm just adding a few little details here and there, trying to intensify a little bit the areas that would really be deep in the shadows. And intensifying those shadows helps to make the contrast of those petals that are on top that would be considered to be white even more stark. So I'm just adding tiny little touches. You don't need a whole lot. Remember, we want to keep the white of the white watercolor paper as crisp and as true as possible, as genuine as possible. So again, we add some bright, vivid green to the foliage, also helping to intensify the contrast between that white flower and the bright colors around it. You'll notice that I'm frequently turning my board, and that is allowing me to keep that point of my paintbrush pointed away from me, while also giving me the best angle at which to do my painting and allow that gravity to help pull my color out. So now our painting is finished. I am going to go back in with my number 4 round silver paintbrush, and I'm going to add some little highlights of color, because a white flower in nature would not be purely white. It would pick up some of the reflections of the colors of the objects around it, of the colors of the objects around it. So I'm adding some extremely diluted bright yellow to the tips of the petals. This is just to kind of brighten up that kind of dull lavender look that we have going. This is kind of optional. It looked fine before, but I wanted to brighten it up a little bit. So I am adding very, very diluted yellow, cleaning my brush, pulling that color out so that it fades completely into clear and still allows that white of the watercolor cardstock to shine through. The yellow just kind of brightens it up a little bit. I'm just doing it along the very edges, and again, lots of water, pulling that color out into a nice clean fade. So now that we've added our yellow, we're going to pick up some of the pinks that are in the pink roses around. We're going to pick up some of the reflections of that. So again, I'm adding very, very diluted pink watercolor to the edges, just kind of the areas that I didn't add much yellow to, so that it doesn't create kind of a dull orange color. Add some of that to the very edges, just kind of the edges that kind of touch where the pink roses and the white petals are next to each other. Adding a little bit more pink to the shadows just to kind of brighten it up a little bit, to keep that dull gray from being the main color. And there you have it. You can see the incredible contrast between the bright areas around that white flower, and it really does look white, even though we did do a lot of work to make sure that it stayed looking white. So now I'm going to add a sentiment. This is a sentiment. There are lots of beautiful sentiments on the Orchid Rose Bouquet stamp set. I'm going to use the kind of blocky Thinking of You. I'm going to heat emboss it on a panel of dark teal cardstock. I think this one is made by Basil, possibly. I'm not sure who makes this one. I just have a ton of different colored cardstocks in my stash. But I am using Hero Arts embossing powder and Hero Arts watermark ink, sticky ink. I'm going to heat it up with my heat tool, and you'll notice when I'm done that there are a few stray flecks of embossing powder left on my my embossed panel. So I'm just going to use my Tim Holtz craft knife and kind of scrape those off a little bit. Really easy way to clean it up, and nobody would ever notice. So now we're going to trim this down to a nice thin strip, and then we're going to back it with some silver glitter cardstock. This is from Altenew. They have a lot of lovely glitter cardstocks in their line, and this is the sterling silver. So we're just going to back the sentiment strip with that sparkly edge, just to give it a little bit more, add a little bit more texture to this card front. We're going to keep things fairly simple, adhering it with liquid adhesive. And now I'm going to add some foam adhesive to the back of the sentiment strip, just to add a little bit of extra dimension to it. And here's a little trick that I use to get my sentiment straight. When I am adhering a foam backed sentiment, I add liquid adhesive on the back, and that gives me a little bit of time to play with the sentiment once I had put it down on my card front, to make sure that it is nice and straight. The final touch is to add a few iridescent iridescent pearls from Studio Katya, and that just adds a little bit of extra texture to my card front. There you have it. Fairly simple, but it does take a little bit of work to make sure that that white flower really does look white and not just kind of dingy and not just flat. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or leave a comment. And if you liked this video, leave me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe if you'd like to see some more content from me. You can also always check out my blog at emilymidget.com. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.